LeBron is the undisputed GOAT in terms of longevity. He's been playing for 2 decades now, and even at nearly 40 is still putting up some insane stats. But what if he played forever? We're taking him back to the 1960s, where he'll play guys like Bill Russell and of course the all-time great Wilt Chamberlain, and he's going to continue to play through time against every single era in NBA history all the way until 2024 through the modern NBA. Going back to the 60s, he was joining the St. Louis Hawks as a rookie and would fascinate the world with basketball abilities like never before seen. His athleticism was only rivaled by the likes of Russell and Chamberlain, and practically instantly he became the most threatening force in the entire NBA. And while this era was filled with LeBron's unbelievable feats of athleticism and highlights over the much lesser competition, there were only 9 total NBA teams during this era, so to prevent repetitiveness, we're going to recap LeBron's accomplishments. From 1960 to 1979, LeBron was awarded a grand total of 11 MVP awards after showcasing his dominance throughout this era, and while he was personally dominating, he also had some respectable teammates throughout the 60s. On the Hawks, he was joined by Bob Pettit and Richie Gurn, who would make a massive difference come playoffs, as LeBron would need some help from the defensive pressure. The playoffs played out a consistent scenario practically every year in the 60s, with LeBron facing the Baylor-led Lakers and the Chamberlain-led Warriors in his conference to attempt to earn a trip to the finals versus the Celtics, who would be there literally every single year throughout the decade. Over the course of the next 10 years, LeBron would have some insane duels with Elgin Baylor and the Lakers. They were similar players at this time who would both be attacking each other on both ends of the court. While LeBron would win this series 6 of the 7 times that they matched up, it was still clear that LeBron had major respect for Baylor and the Lakers organization, and it may have led to a change that we would be seeing in a few years. The other major matchup in this decade was of course the Warriors, who LeBron would face a total of 8 times in the playoffs. With Wilt leading the way for this team, it was a matchup of 2 athletic anomalies. More often than not, these matches would be the semifinals to determine who would be facing the Celtics. By no means would this series be one-sided, with many of the matchups going the distance to 7 games, but in the end it was obvious that LeBron was the better player, as he'd be the victor of these battles 6 out of the 8 matchups, which in turn meant he had an opportunity for 6 championships as he was facing the Boston Celtics in the finals. Boston of course had the spotlight on Bill Russell, who was a defensive mastermind and a dominant force down low, but you'd be crazy to not also mention the elite supporting cast of guys like Sam Jones and John Havlicek and even Tom Sanders. They were a legitimate force, and it was obvious why Russell had won 11 times in a reality that we all know. LeBron went back down from this challenge though and showed why he was winning so many MVP awards. He was attacking Boston and attempting to carry his team over the hump. He was getting Pettit involved, and they formed a devastating 2-man offense that was far better than any 2 that Boston could offer. While it wouldn't be a perfect stretch, LeBron would still perform better than I had expected and come out of the stretch with 3 championships and 6 appearances until the clock turned to 1968 and James decided to join some rivals. In free agency, he decided that this would be a good opportunity to join Baylor and the Lakers, who have been battling versus for years to this point, and apparently Wilt had the same exact idea, as he'd also joined LA the same year. Now they had a very formidable team that they'd stampede into the finals with to face Bill Russell for what would be the last season of his career. All 3 of these players had been facing Russell in the finals separately for the better part of the 60s, and now they were all finally united together. This would be a cakewalk and a sweep that would send Bill into retirement. And this wouldn't be the only finals that they'd be running through, as over the course of the next few years, the Lakers would completely run the league. No team could even think about realistically stopping this 3-headed monster that formed in Los Angeles. The next 4 playoff trips would all result in a trip to the finals, where the Lakers would completely upset their opponents, whether it was the Bucks or the Knicks, throughout this stretch. And by 1973, LeBron was already hoisting up his 8th championship trophy, but things were about to slow down. The following season, Wilt would sit out all year before retiring the season after, and now LeBron would have significantly less help around him. He'd stick it out with the Lakers, and while his team was having some great performances, his team wasn't able to make any more deep playoff runs. This would last until the end of the 70s, where LeBron would leave the Lakers for the Sixers, as we were entering the Bird and Magic era. In Philadelphia, LeBron was joining the electrifying superstar Julius Erving to create a dynamic duo. Dr. J was at the peak of his career and would be an exciting teammate for LeBron. They were both high flyers who loved to share the ball, which resulted in some gorgeous alley-oops. This was a refreshing change for LeBron after spending the last 6 years on a mediocre Lakers team, and he was loving every moment of it. Remotivated by his change in scenery, James was having one of his best seasons so far, which would help lead his team to the playoffs and some personal praise. Somehow LeBron got Defensive Player of the Year. I really don't know how. He got pretty subpar defensive stats. I'm pretty sure there had to have been someone better. But hey, I guess it's going to LeBron. No MVP. Magic got that. But we are headed to the playoffs again. The first round of the playoffs was versus LeBron's hometown Cleveland Cavaliers, but he wasn't going easy on them just because he was back in Ohio. He completely dismantled their defense through the series and easily sweep 3-0 in the best-of-5 series. Round 2 seemed to be even easier for LeBron and the Sixers as they were battling Milwaukee for a trip to the conference finals in what was a pretty one-sided match. Sidney Moncrief was the only Bucks player worth an introduction, and to be honest, he was fighting for his team. He had some great performances to try and keep the Bucks in it and had me slightly concerned that he could possibly upset LeBron, but in the end, LeBron proved to be too much and was knocking Milwaukee out of the postseason. In his last hurdle to the finals would be a rookie Larry Bird, who was playing like anything but a rookie. As of now, Bird didn't have some of his iconic teammates just yet, but he had himself, which was plenty of a threat to LeBron. Larry was being defended by the Defensive Player of the Year, but it was apparent that it didn't matter to him who was guarding him, and he planned on scoring regardless. Going into Game 3, the series was all knotted up 1-1, and with Larry Bird having an unbelievable playoff scoring performance, he would set his team up to take the lead in the series. Philly's down 17 with a minute to go. Boston's gonna go up in this series 2-1. That's huge. Larry Bird had 60 points in this game. That Defensive Player of the Year is looking like it did not matter. Who is this guy? I don't know, man. LeBron has to win this next game in Boston. LeBron was officially down in the series for the first time in the playoffs, and all eyes would be on how he responds. Straight out the gates, he was aggressive and trying to do what he could to keep his team in this series. He knew just how difficult it would be to win on the road in Boston, but he was up to the challenge and proving it to the world. His running mate, Dr. J, was just as motivated as LeBron to get this win on the road, and he was doing his part as well, providing a huge scoring boost to the Sixers. But even with all of that, Larry Bird was going to keep this game close. LeBron and Dr. J have both been playing incredible, but this game is still close. 2-point game here in the last shot clock possession. Dennis Johnson with the ball. He loses it. Dr. J gets it. He gets time out quick. Yo, that might do it. They might win this game. The Celtics fouled LeBron. If he hits both these free throws, which he hits number 1, if he gets the next one, that's going to do a 4-point lead. That's going to be too much for Boston to overcome with 16 seconds left. King James in the clutch to tie the series. It is good. We're headed to Game 5. Following the huge win in the final moments, the Sixers would go on to continue that incredible play through the following 2 matches and were somehow able to escape demise at the hands of the Celtics, but now an even bigger challenge awaits. Magic Johnson was the real deal, even only in his rookie season. And while the Sixers have the impressive high-flying duo, they don't have a good center. Unfortunately, this was a massive issue for Philly as Kareem would be having an absolute field day in this series. The Sixers starting center was only 6'9", and he certainly was not capable defensively to slow down Kareem. With this massive mismatch constantly glaring in the face of LeBron, it was by no surprise that the Lakers would be winning the series in 4, with the Sixers not even having a chance. And while the Lakers would celebrate their championship, LeBron was left knowing he would need help at the center to get over this obstacle. And the worst part for King James is it's gonna be a few years before he gets any help at center, so he's gonna have to figure something out. And even though LeBron wasn't getting any help at the center just yet, he was still going on to having another incredible season that resulted in his 12th MVP. But of course, that was only the regular season, because come postseason, while he would get by the first 2 rounds with relative ease again, he'd face the Celtics for a rematch, but this time they have both McHale and Parrish added to the roster. These 2 Hall of Fame bigs proved to be the same problem the Sixers faced the year prior against the Lakers, and LeBron was losing in the conference finals by a wide margin. And in 1982, after a long season, LeBron would meet the exact same fate in the playoffs versus Boston. Yet again, cannot get by Boston, but he did get another MVP, also Defensive Player of the Year. And going into 1983, he's getting some major help. Philly finally got a great big in Moses Malone. Not only was he a fantastic center, but he was an MVP caliber player, and now the Sixers have one of the scariest teams in basketball, and it showed in the standings headed into the playoffs where they would be ready to meet Boston in the conference finals. Things were finally different this time, and LeBron was force-feeding Malone down low. He was aware the biggest difference maker in the series was by far going to be Moses, and he'd have to be playing at his absolute best if they were going to come out on top. With Moses working on offense, the defensive responsibilities would be on LeBron trying to slow down Larry. This, of course, was a much easier said than done task, as Bird would be giving it to LeBron over and over again. Eventually, though, LeBron would get Bird under wraps, which turned defense into offense as his team was able to finally overcome Boston. And now we find out if the Sixers can overcome the even more talented Lakers. Last time we saw them, they dominated with Kareem in the post, and while they still have Kareem, they have even more firepower now by adding James Worthy, who was a pure all-star on both ends of the court. And this was all great for the Lakers, but LeBron was on the hunt. He had been waiting for this moment for 4 years and was desperate to get revenge. It felt like he was giving Los Angeles some long due punishment as he mercilessly attacked the rim. Game 1 and 2 in front of the Philly fans would be blowout wins to take command of this series, but then this thing was headed back to Los Angeles for Game 3. There's a reason why this team is considered one of the greatest basketball teams ever formed, and they showed the world they deserved a title as they were retaliating on their home court. Showtime was a real thing as their fast-paced game swept Philly off of their feet. They were running out the gym with the fast breaks after fast breaks with an insanely high pace and got this thing locked up 2-2. And in a pivotal Game 5, it would be back in Philly for LeBron, and the theme of protecting the home court was continuing as LeBron was able to send his fans home happy, one win away from a ring. That win would be waiting though, because in Game 6, Philly didn't have enough to win on the road, and we would be getting a Game 7. In this finale, the Lakers would be the ones to strike first by taking a huge 12-point lead early. This was spearheaded by Kareem in the post, who was outclassing Malone while the lights were the absolute brightest. Things were looking grim here in Philly as Kareem was exposing their defense in the biggest game of the year, but LeBron wasn't out just yet. In the second half, he was on a mission to get back into this game. He had came way too far to allow it to end like this. Defensively, he was locked in, but the true wonder of this game was the nearly perfect offensive performance he mustered up in the second half. Every single shot seemed to be dropping, and there was nothing slowing him down. Come late fourth quarter, he flipped the lead around to benefit him and the Sixers and was up comfortably as they ultimately defeated Los Angeles and were being rewarded with the prize they had their eyes on. They'd celebrate their huge win and start their hopes of a repeat the following year. LeBron and the Sixers got the best record this year, headed into the playoffs. LeBron another MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. Now the question is, can they pull off the repeat? Again, they'd face Boston in the conference finals, and this time it was clear who the better team was by now because Philly was flying past Boston. As good as Bird was in his prime, LeBron was simply better, and he was one step closer to a potential repeat. By no surprise, the Sixers would match up with the Lakers again this year in the finals. It would be just as back and forth as it was the year prior, with LeBron and Magic Johnson in an all-out battle together. These two seemed to be totally evenly matched, and their supporting cast had nearly the same structure as well. Both featured an elite wing teammate and an elite big man. The victor of the match will ultimately be determined by who was playing better between Magic and LeBron, and the one coming out on top this time again would be King James, who now has 2 rings versus Magic. And as LeBron beats Magic Johnson, this finals MVP, well-deserved, 41 points a game, this man went insane and now has a chance for a three-peat. And at 86, Barkley, entering his second year, was molding into an all-star, and at this point, the Sixers have by far the best team we've ever seen in basketball. LeBron was headed into the playoffs with the best record ever and as favorites to win it all. As you'd expect, LeBron and his mega team were sweeping through these playoffs without anyone able to compete. The Wizards will fall in round 1, and in round 2, he'd face the very talented Detroit Pistons, who boasted the best defense in basketball, but it wouldn't be enough to slow down this group as they pushed forward to face a young Michael Jordan in the conference finals. MJ was putting up a very impressive fight here in the conference finals and will certainly be a major challenge for LeBron in the future, but as of now, he was far too inexperienced to compete, and the Sixers would be able to get by with a win before going on to the finals, where yet again they would face the Lakers. While the last 2 matches both went to 7 games, this wouldn't be the case this time as the Lakers were aging and Philly was only getting better. This would be a clear conclusion with the Sixers taking this one home for the 3rd straight year, but change was on the horizon for LeBron. And after that finals, I noticed LeBron is no longer on the Sixers and he decided to join the Supersonics. I don't even know why. You could have built a dynasty in Philadelphia. I was definitely confused by LeBron's decision to leave in free agency, but he left me dazzled by his crazy level of play with the new team. Over the past few years, he was on an incredibly deep roster that would take a lot of his looks, and now as the only guy worthwhile on his team, every single duty would be on his hands. I'm sure nobody is shocked that he would rise to the occasion. Under the pressure of being the sole star, he'd still find a way to carry his team and put on a show for the fans en route to more incredible stats, an MVP, and a trip to the 2nd round versus the 2nd-seeded Rockets. Houston had a young but very dominant Hakeem Olajuwon leading the group. It was almost like deja vu because, again, LeBron's team lacked a relevant center to match up versus a league filled with some of the best centers of all time. Olajuwon was piecing apart Seattle's defense trip after trip with ease, and on the other end, LeBron did just enough to help his team get 1 win, but he didn't have enough in the tank to get much more than that as he'd be falling to the Rockets. Over the course of the next few seasons, the Sonics would of course remain remain competitive while being carried by LeBron, but eventually in the playoffs, they would fall short of their ultimate goal of winning a ring. In 1988, he'd be facing the Clippers in round 1 and losing a tightly contested 5-game series. Then in 1989, he was up against the Blazers in the conference finals, but Clyde Drexler proved to be too much to handle. And again, in 1990, the conference finals would be Bron's downfall against Stockton and the Predator, and finally they were bounced in round 2 by the Phoenix Suns in an upset in 91. But in 1992, LeBron had enough losing and was ready for change. Shawn Kemp was having a huge breakout season, and Payton was starting to gain his reputation as the glove with his elite defense. These two provided a lot of help to LeBron, even if he didn't really need it, as he was in a league all of his own with a year-long masterclass that only he was capable of. LeBron was absolutely thriving with his new look team, and he closed out the season with the best record. With the newfound motivation, Seattle was soaring through the playoffs, starting with the Spurs, getting revenge in round 2 against the Suns, and even more revenge in the conference finals against the Jazz to finally get back into the finals after years. And we had a highly anticipated matchup of what was considered the 2 top players in basketball. Yeah, I think we all knew that this would happen sooner or later. LeBron was ready to put on a show, finally back in the finals, but in game 1, Jordan would be the one making the first move. With an offensive assault, even with the defensive specialist Payton sticking him, and he was up 1-0 in the finals. This didn't mean much to LeBron, however, because he knew it was a long series and he was taking it game by game. The next match in Seattle, he'd be taking a win home, and headed into Chicago for game 3, he kept up that play with another win and led the series before MJ was propelling his team to the finish line with a strong game 4 showing and tying everything back up. By now, you would be fooled to think either team was going to run away with this series without it going the distance, as in the next 2 games, both stars would trade heavy blows and knot everything up for a game 7. Where simcasting this game 7 is so far is looking pretty close. Neither team is able to get any separation. Maybe the Bulls are separating a little bit here late in the 4th. This one might be going down to Chicago. Seattle still trying to come back, and they're right back into this thing. With Seattle down 2, the next few possessions result in gritty, hard-fought defensive stops for both teams until just under a minute left. LeBron would drive his way to the basket and find a wide-open teammate to tie the game up. The following play, Jordan would try to post up Payton, but he'd end up being just slightly off, and on the break, Cage would end up being fouled and sent to the line to give his team a 2-point lead. Cage just made 2 free throws to give Seattle a 2-point lead. Michael Jordan winning at 17 seconds. He's going quick. Jordan draws the foul. He's headed to the line. As we all expected, MJ hits both of those free throws. 15 seconds left, coming up a timeout. What did Seattle draw? Shawn Kemp is fouled out. It's got to be LeBron James here. 10 seconds. He's drawing down the clock. He's got to ground him. LeBron, get to the paint, the pump, the tough slide. He gets it in for the 2-point lead. Chicago, no timeouts. They're going to have to go quick. Is it going to be a half-court heat from Paxson? It is. John Paxson, it's off. LeBron beats Jordan in the first of what I imagine will be multiple NBA Finals. LeBron makes the first strike, and he's a champion again with the city of Seattle. After their ring, Seattle got even hungrier as they added more depth with Schrempf and an even solid center pickup with Sam Perkins to round out their starting lineup. They'd again be the most dominant team in the West and find themselves locked into a rematch with Chicago in the finals. Like I mentioned, the Sonics had expanded their depth and definitely improved since the previous year, but Jordan must have taken the last loss extra personal because there was absolutely no denying him the championship this year. He looked to be by far the best player on the court throughout the entire series. His scoring was too much for Seattle to possibly match, and no matter what defensive scheme they threw at him, it wasn't making any difference at all. Jordan would leave Chicago and would be halting any hope LeBron had of a repeat with Seattle, but that would be it for MJ, as after those finals, he was announcing he would retire, and now things were completely wide open for LeBron James and the Sonics for the next few seasons without Chicago in their way. With MJ and the Bulls out of the picture, this was LeBron's league now. It wasn't even a contest, as he was the undisputed best player in ball, and he was crowned the MVP in both 1994 and 1995 thanks to his stellar level of play, and in the playoffs both years, no team was able to get any more than 2 wins at any playoff series. And while the Rockets would give him some respectable matchups in the West with Hakeem playing in his prime, Seattle really had far too much skill, and while the Rockets were a slight challenge, the Sonics would still be winning and heading into the finals in 1994 versus the Pacers. This is where LeBron would have an easy 4-0 sweep for ring number 13, and then in 1995, he'd be earning ring 14 versus the Cavaliers, who upset the Knicks in the conference finals, but couldn't compete versus LeBron and the Sonics. But come 1996, it it would no longer be a walk in the park. LeBron's tyrannic reign of the NBA was continuing in 96 as he was working his way through the playoffs again. Every round in the West seemed pointless as nobody could keep up and fans just wanted to skip straight to the finals. And I mean, come on, we know who this finals is gonna be against. Both of the teams are 72-10. I mean, we are in for a treat here in this series. There was a major difference this time since last matchup with Rodman joining. He made a huge difference on the glass and of course on the defensive end of the ball. But as we all know, the main star was still Michael Jordan, who is coming off one of the greatest seasons of all time. He was the leading force in his team, earning a 72-10 record and was again leading the charge in this series. But the Sonics got a lot better since the last matchup too. Peyton was now one of the top point guards in the entire league and his defense was something special. And by now his offensive game developed with an uncanny ability to run the pick and roll, which would prove to be a major difference maker as Seattle was up 3-2. Years ago, Jordan was down 3-2 to LeBron and was able to force him into a game 7. So this time LeBron was prepared to prevent that from happening. Game 6 of the series became LeBron's playground as if he was in a shoot-around all by himself. No defensive pressure was affecting him and every shot was falling in. He had been efficient all of this final series, but this match went even further with a 50-point performance, which was enough to celebrate in Seattle as a 15-time NBA champion. Elated off of completing the three-peat in 1997, things appear to be continuing the same as they had. LeBron and the Sonics were killing it in the regular season and finishing with well over 60 wins, all to place the first seed and ready to begin their run in the playoffs. There was a major problem. LeBron really lost in round 1 to the Blazers. Oh my God. The issue would even compound as Kemp would leave to Cleveland that next year, and while Bron still did have enough to get into the playoffs, he was met by Olajuwon, who would finally get past the man who had prevented him from having any success during the 90s. And unfortunately, this would start an awful stretch for Bron. The West was becoming very stacked, with guys like Tim Duncan on the Spurs taking over and the young Kobe Bryant developing while playing alongside Shaq on the Lakers. But the next few years, LeBron would be falling shorter than he'd like, and in 2003, Seattle finally brought him some help by adding Ray Allen. This young Ray Allen was of course the best shooter the NBA had seen by this point, but was also an athletic, capable finisher, which made him an elite scorer. With the addition of Ray, Seattle was working their way up the hierarchy of the West, and while they'd have some epic duels versus the West elite, they just weren't deep enough to outlast the early 2000s Lakers or make any strides to get past teams like the Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki at an MVP level, the Suns with Steve Nash orchestrating one of the best offenses ever, and of course the Dynasty Spurs, who were cemented during this era. So LeBron refuses to leave Seattle. I don't know if there's just the baddest bitches ever out there or what. We're in 2008. He hasn't done anything in like a decade. He does have a rookie KD with him now, but he's a free agent. So I'm gonna see, does he stick it out with Seattle, try to grow with KD, or is he gonna change teams? The Knicks. LeBron joined the Knicks. There was no other star caliber players in New York, which would be something LeBron hasn't experienced since the late 80s. It wasn't anything LeBron couldn't handle though, and he would continue to put up the type of stats that we're all accustomed to after 50 years, but unfortunately he wouldn't make the playoffs this year, and following in 2010, he was bounced early in the playoffs versus the stacked Celtics in round 1. But luckily in 2011, Carmelo Anthony was joining the Knicks. As we all know, Melo was one of the league's top scorers from anywhere on the court and would pair perfectly with James, who was a highly willing facilitator. The only problem though was their bench was definitely terrible. Still didn't make the playoffs as the 4th seed versus the Hawks in round 1, and while their standings were close, this series wouldn't be as Melo and LeBron were by a wide margin the best players in the series and would get New York the win. But round 2 was a different story with the MVP awaiting LeBron. Derrick Rose had led his hometown team to the top record in the league and didn't intend to stop here in the playoffs. For LeBron, while the starting lineup was on the court, they'd be in front, but the moment substitutions had to be made, Chicago would completely rally into leads far too large to surmount. The lack of depth on this Knicks roster was becoming obvious, and it would kill their chances in this series. But rest assured, help was on the way as Chandler rounded out the front court, and they added J.R. Smith to their guard rotation along with Shumpert and Jeremy Lin. With their new look unit, LeBron would reclaim the title of the best record in the NBA and finally had a legit chance in the playoffs again. Round 1 was again versus the Hawks and would act as a warm-up. It's been a considerable time since LeBron was on a roster good enough to compete for a trip to the finals, and getting back ready was important as they got past Atlanta. Following Atlanta, they faced Boston, but their big three was starting to get older and weren't as scary as they would have been a few years back. This series was a huge one for Carmelo, and even though LeBron still played well, MVP of the round would for sure be Anthony as they were advancing to the conference finals. And these conference finals were nothing special with a Dwight-led Magic team waiting there, and the only problem was Dwight was the only player considered a problem. This made things incredibly easy for LeBron and the Knicks, as finally he was getting back to the NBA Finals. And it was against the Mavericks, who were making an attempt to repeat. Dirk gave LeBron several losses through the early and mid 2000s, and now finally he had the chance to defeat him on the biggest stage. And boy, was he doing just that while putting on a scoring clinic, because over the course of the first 4 games he led all scorers, and even then still wasn't stopping from putting more pain into the hearts of the Mavericks organization. Finally, LeBron wins the finals again, and I'm not really sure how any team is gonna beat this Knicks team anytime soon. And I was right, because in the 2013 season, LeBron was winning another finals versus Kobe Bryant to get revenge on another rival of the 2000s. And then again in 2014, Bron would continue his reign as the king with the defeat of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And while many of Bron's rings came while parts of super teams, his real test would be now to carry a team on his own. And that's because he was joining the Sacramento Kings in his final stretch. They were one of the worst teams in basketball, so I was confused as why he decided to join them. Maybe it was a desire to prove he could carry a team all the way up, or maybe it was just 2K's terrible engine for player free agency decisions. Either way, LeBron was feasting in his new home here in California, but another Californian team was 100% running the league at this point, and LeBron had no chance with his team until after Durant would leave in 2020. Right away, James was taking advantage of the Warriors' drop in superiority after losing KD. They found themselves making their way through the playoffs, and even though the team was starting Dwayne Dedmon at center and the second best player on the roster was De'Aaron Fox, they'd still managed to make it to the finals versus the Sixers. But if you recall, I mentioned Dedmon was the starting center. Joel Embiid was having an absolute field day, possession after possession. Embiid was putting pressure on the Kings defense by attacking Dedmon ruthlessly. Even if the Kings attempted a double, he would find open guys, and this was just too much to handle regardless of how well LeBron was playing. In the following 2 years, again, LeBron would get close with a conference finals loss in 21, and in 2022 he would fight to the finals again but fall short to the Celtics, all to lead up to 2023 where the Kings would add Sabonis. This would be LeBron's last year, and he found himself in the finals with a chance for one more ring. It was a rematch versus the Sixers, and Embiid still had an advantage over the underside Sabonis down low, but this time Sacramento had plenty of firepower to outscore the Sixers and make up for the mismatch at center. LeBron and the Kings were finally closing the gap and completing their ultimate goal. It was a gentleman's sweep as Sacramento was lighting the beam after 5 games, and LeBron was wrapping this career up. It was 63 long years, and Bron won 17 rings, 29 MVPs, and 4 Defensive Player of the Years in one crazy long ride. But what about all those teams he never won a ring with? You can see every single team win an NBA championship by clicking this video next.